So I have been looking forward to this session with this exact title for 8 years. And I am really pleased. I didn't know exactly where it would be in this place or what the name of the conference would be, but this is very cool. And a lot of folks up here have been thinking about this for a while as well. And I think the goals here are really pretty incredible. The goal here for a lot of us is to change the nature of work. No small thing. Work is tough. Work is sometimes repetitive and boring. Sometimes you don't know how you're doing. You don't have any autonomy. You kind of lose track of your small contribution to some larger good. So we're going to talk today about the issues involved with transforming that work using the sensibilities that are part of this conference. So we've had a chance to exchange a little email. I've known some of the folks previously here, but we've got a good large panel here. And here's what I have written them, and they haven't necessarily agreed, but I'm going to take their lack of response. Here's what we'll do. The first thing I'd like to do is have everybody introduce themselves, maybe with some keywords that are not in the written material that you have in your program. And I'd also like each of you to think about naming a game at work. It could be one that you've worked on or your company works on that we can use as an example, or you think is something to put forward to this crowd as an operational definition of what this could look like. And then what I'm going to do is we've actually identified in our exchanges 10 different issues, and we'll at least cover all of them, or we'll cover all of them, or I will mention what they are before we leave, so you kind of know some of the things that we think are important in this area. And I might call out somebody to start with the questioning. We might not get to all 5 for each question, but I want to encourage the panelists here to, especially as they have responses that might be different, or maybe even a debate style rebuttal or something to questions. We'll go through that. So the first thing let's do is introduce ourselves. So and I'll start just so I can name my game that I was just thinking about this morning. Byron Reeves. I'm a professor at Stanford. I do experiments, a lot of physiology, primitive responses to psychological responses that people have while they're playing games. That in standard journal science. I'm interested on the business side and actually trying to build enterprise software that can help bring these sensibilities to the workplace. And the game I thought of this morning that I'm not sure I like the game, and I'm not even sure it's a game capital G, but this is really something interesting. When you go to Target next time, look at the screen that the checkout counter that the clerk is using to scan your products. You'll see that they get a G for green or an R for red. I'm not saying this is a great game, but it is a game. And the colors represent whether or not the time it took you to scan an article or an object, product that's coming across your table was below or above the norms for the company across the nation. So tube of toothpaste goes by quickly. You get a green child sweater you have to fold, takes a little bit longer, and that is scored, and you get a percentage at the end of that's being calculated in real time how you're doing. Now, not a tremendous game, no pictures, but what I like about that is it's so intimately integrated into the actual work experience. It's the place on this screen where the person is actually doing the work. So next time you're there, ask the clerk whether they're in any fantasy league with other folks at the counter. So that's my game. Let's start here, Charlie. Just go down the table here.
Charlie Kim, founder and CEO of NextJump. It's a 17-year-old company I started back when I was in college. We have built the most advanced points and loyalty technology that's out there, and it's currently adopted by 90,000 business clients, where we started in the employee workplace, and that's where we dominate probably more than anywhere else. 70% of the Fortune 1000 are clients of ours, and we run their employee reward, shopping, and points programs at the workplace. And the games that we've built range from products for our clients, but products internally. The internal product is a fitness portal that we built to try to encourage our close to 300 employees to go to the gym more often. Obviously, fitness is probably the single highest correlation to healthcare costs, where if you work out in gyms, you tend to sort of lower your health risk, and which lowers healthcare costs and whatnot, and also, of course, productivity. Before we applied gamification, we were getting 15% of our employees to work out in the gym twice a week, which is a pretty decent number. After we applied a tool that literally got built over a weekend by a team of engineers called the Fitness Portal, where everyone in the company got broken up into 5 teams globally, and you had to check in to go to the gym, and you had to go to the gym at least twice a week to count for a point. Once that leaderboard and that game got put in place, the number shot up quickly to 80% of the employees who have been going to the gym twice a week consistently for the last year and a half. So pretty big success there. I think on the points front, we built a lot of programs with a virtual currency called WOW Points. And I think someone in the audience right before this asked the question about gender differences about games. And the one thing we found in gender that was interesting with points was when the points currency was difficult to use, as in difficult to redeem or burn with, we found heavily dominated by men using the earning and burning of this currency. Once it actually got easy to use, and could almost use it like cash, the dominance changed completely to women. More women started to use it, and the usage of the currency grew 100-fold in 6 months. And so that's something we found that was interesting.
Obi Fernandez, serial entrepreneur, author, well-known in the Ruby on Rails community. So I'm kind of coming from a programming background, not a game background. But my current startup, which is about 3 to 6 months old, depending on when you count our start date, is working to gamify an aspect of work that I think is doesn't get enough attention, and that's the appreciation amongst peers. So basically what we're trying to do is through applying game mechanics, make it easier and more fun for folks to give each other virtual high fives, attaboys, and great job kind of interactions. And in applying the earning of points and karma and the applying of challenges for different kinds of props that we call them that you can get, we think that it helps employees not only improve their work lives, but it also helps the employer in terms of retention and productivity. So our product is in private beta. It's called Dueprops.com, and I'm here to talk about different ways that these kinds of game mechanics can be applied to improving employees' lives, not only in health and some of the things that people have been working on for a while, but also in the way that they interact with each other in the workplace and in work kinds of scenarios. And the game that I was thinking of is actually a really simple game that I used to play with my consultancy. We had about 35 to 50 people over the years, and we had staff meetings, and we would play a thank you game where we would create a thank you chain. And basically there was the pattern was I would give thanks to, say, Byron for inviting me to the panel, and then Byron would give thanks to Gabe for inviting him to present the panel, and so on and so forth. And there was peer pressure to, on the spot, be ready to give appreciation to someone else in the group, and we kind of carried that chain through the staff meeting until it was exhausted and basically everyone had given appreciation. This was done once a month, and it was part of the seeds of the idea for Dueprops, in the sense I said, you know, this isn't something that we should only be doing once a month or, God forbid, once a year as part of a review process. This is something that should be happening every day. You know, a crowd at a football game doesn't just cheer at the end of the quarter or the end of the game. They cheer continuously. And what we're trying to do is bring that to work. You know, have everyone kind of be cheering each other on in a way that still fits within social norms. And we think a game is a good way to do it.
Good. Mario.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mario. I'm working with SAP. SAP is the world's largest business software vendor. We have 109,000 corporate customers. So if we introduce gamification into the software, we have a huge leverage on how many people are using that later on. And in fact, I'm just coming from Las Vegas, where we have right now running our SAP Tech Ed, where we had Jane McGonigal giving the keynote about gamification to 6,500 attendees. And a day before that, we had a little hackathon around gamification with 200 people, creating 13 gamified business apps. And I thought, I thought the conference here is about gamification, but it looks a little bit still too dry, and especially this topic is probably the most boring one. It's right after lunch. And I brought a couple of Angry Birds from our conference with us. And if you want to earn...
black bombs?
The black bombs, I ran out of them. Okay. They were really appreciated by the attendees. And we are going to toss them into the audience, but you have to earn that. And earning that means you have to do some pig sounds, these provoking pig sounds. Oh, God. So I want to hear that. Can you do them?
Oh, God.
Is it good enough, or should we ask for more?
Fantastic.
Ask for more. It was not good enough.
Especially on this side over here. I heard.
Oh, this is a little bit. So we only sing. Ah, that was a good one. That was a good one. I think you deserve now that you get some Angry Birds.
Thank you, Mario. Kes, what did you bring us?
Hi, my name is Kes Sampathar. I'm with Cynergy. We're a technology agency. I'm actually come back from an AI background, AI research, and I've been looking at this idea of using game design techniques to improve the experience of software for a while. And I actually started going more into the latest neuroscience, and I came up with a framework which we call motivational design. And the interesting thing about motivational design as we talked to customers was initially we were focusing on consumer and marketing, but we realized there was a huge group of enterprise customers who are really interested in how you create engagement between employees, between B2B vendors to improve logistics, supply chain, healthcare, but actually with doctors and nurses and in the infrastructure of a hospital. And we've realized that motivational design can be used in a lot of areas where the initial reaction to games is actually fairly negative, but actually understanding the full motivational profile of people, we do so many things which we don't have to do. If you look at what humans do, and we realize that motivational design can tap into a lot of those things. So the example I was thinking about, we do a lot of work for large companies, so I can't actually name the vendor, but it was actually a large automotive company which was trying to roll out a supply chain system to their dealerships. And initially the reaction was we didn't want a lot of dealerships being competitive, because actually to improve the profile of the cars they were getting, they actually had to collaborate. So we had to design a very subtle system which actually encouraged collaboration while keeping the competitive edge of dealerships. And that was a very interesting example where we used these game design principles there.
Mario, I was hoping to keep my toy to make the introduction, but I don't have it. Maksim Ovsyannikov with Rypple. Rypple is social software for feedback, engagement, social reviews, goal management, collaboration around them, and recognition at work. We have many customers, among them Facebook is using Rypple. I'm here to talk about how we based entirety of what we built on gamification. We're in a very interesting area of the enterprise. Some of you may call it human capital management, HR, or talent management. And you will probably agree with me that HR people are not traditionally the most gamified people of the enterprise because they're more compliance-oriented and law-oriented. And so we had a lot of challenges in really adopting the right game for the right amount of work and the right engagement mechanism to then convince them, managers and individual employees, that it actually helps put meaning back into performance management, which I think a lot of you will also agree that reviews that you get on an annual basis probably lack a lot of meaning. The feedback is too little, too late. And so that's what we're here to solve with a lot of gamification. The tool that I like, I was thinking that I won't mention my own, even though I love it. All of us are here, and so we probably had to come here from far, some of us, and so then you will have expenses that you will need to get reimbursed. And so the tool that I like is Expensify. I don't know how many of you use it, but I like how they gamify the aspect of how much money the company actually owes you. And so as you continue going from one conference to another, from one customer to another, you accumulate these expenses. And if you dedicate a credit card to that aspect, it will automatically feed all of your expenses and remind you and kind of gamify the whole aspect and give you a dashboard of all the things that the company owes you, which I find very useful, that I can put in front of my CFO and say, here's what you've got to pay.
Good, thanks. So I'm going to start out with a couple questions here. I'm going to start out with Kes. You can take the first shot at this one. The difference between a consumer context and an enterprise context. I think the default assumption for a lot of the gamification folks is that we're building game sensibilities into public-facing, mostly websites, using mechanics that will allow people to participate more, but to do things, the competition for consumers may be television, Facebook, surfing, talking to friends. How is that context at all different from an enterprise context where the competition might be Excel, SAP, not having a job? What special consideration should we give to the enterprise context, if any? Kes, what do you think?
I mean, so as we first focused on consumer and then moved to the enterprise, the biggest change which we had was in the consumer space, we spent a lot of time looking at getting awareness and then getting that first initial engagement and adoption of it. When we moved to the enterprise, we found ourselves in a lot of situations where the software was actually getting rolled out of companies, and it's more about, you know, the traditional ways, training programs and, you know, trying to make sure people are using the system correctly. Change is really hard for people. And when large IT systems are rolled out, we found that we had to use very different kinds of motivational design technique to actually start understanding it. I mean, when we're looking at efficiency gains or productivity, we have to focus a lot on how something's rolled. So similar to how in a game, you don't have to actually read a manual to play Halo, and you can get started up very quickly. We wanted to design software which could also be bootstrapped very quickly and started very easily, and not by the heavy-handed gamification techniques initially. We actually used very subtle ones before, as we drew people into engaging in software. So that was our main challenge and main change, which we had to focus on our software design.
So how do you introduce it was the main difference between those two contexts. Any mechanics differences that we should highlight?
We focused on slightly different motivations. So, you know, as we looked at our motivational profiles, you know, with awareness and consumer products, we were looking at curiosity, opening up information gaps, drawing people in and getting them initially engaged. With, when we were rolling on enterprise systems, we looked a little bit more at like collaboration or cooperation. We wanted to encourage people helping each other. So early adopters could help other people and they could become experts. So we started using more social patterns earlier than we do in the consumer space. So then we started focusing on mastery and a few other things like that.
Good.
But it was a different set of patterns which we used.
Other panelists?
I think another difference between consumer and enterprise gamification is that in consumer gamification, you really pay less attention to the actual business benefit because there may not be one in mind, and you may not be actually measuring that business benefit. And I think a lot of people that introduce gamification into enterprise software then also forget to actually measure that business benefit. And I think that the goal of gamification in enterprise is to engage people in accomplishing goals that the organization says or that they collaborate on, right? So then this measurement aspect of what happens as a result of it is really, really important.
Good.
I think one big difference is consumer have a choice. If I don't like the gamification on Guild, I'm not there. I'm not using it. As an employee, I have to use this tool. I have to use travel expense system, and that forces me to that. So we have to be careful of how we introduce gamification in there, maybe making it less intrusive, less jumping into your face, not with this another badge coming up and here 5 million points that I can earn, but do it in a more subtle way. You also don't want to spend 8 hours a day playing, maybe stressful, even if it is eustress, positive stress, but 8 hours is very intensive doing that stuff. So we might want to think of having certain areas already ungamified, not doing anything there. So that's...
Okay, good, Charlie.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is probably around the notion of experimentation. I think in the consumer field, you can experiment, and by definition, experiment has to have the ability to fail. I think when you go into an enterprise where you have CEOs, you have management teams, is the leadership team open to the notion of truly experimenting? And I think when they don't let you experiment, the chance of success in building a game is going to be, slim to none.
Yeah, it's difficult to iterate. the way that a lot of our advanced development groups are used to working in iterative fashion and having split testing going on and just kind of this agile development style doesn't lend itself well to an environment where HR is wanting you to produce an onboarding package and a PowerPoint that they're going to show to the whole staff as to how this thing's going to work. So that presents some particularly interesting challenges, especially since even if the company signs up to a 3-year contract, if the onboarding fails and people don't use it, then very quickly it gets marginalized and turned into...
That's a good point. So if the game sucks just a little bit, it's okay because we're going to pay you to play. Okay, let's do another topic here. Let's start with Obie. I had your name down here for thinking about actually how to do this. A lot of people here, and a lot of us as well, are thinking about how to get this done. What kind of expertise would you need to produce in a team or even within a person? And we've had a couple exchanges, especially on expertise related to game design and all the things that might mean, versus experts in business process, business strategy. I mean, these games all have particular goals. The metrics are against particular business goals, but obviously that has to be aligned with fun and all the things that people are doing. But obviously we want both. But come down, tell me which is more important or how you deal with that dichotomy.
I think we all live and die by engagement of our products and our programs. So even if management puts down a dictate that a certain tool is to be used because we sold them on it, if the game is not fun and interesting and doesn't present an aspect of the job in a way that is compelling to use, people will just find ways to work around it or ignore it. So I have found that the game design aspect and the engagement, even when it comes down to simple things like the proper timing of notification emails to let them know, the feedback, it's not necessarily obvious to someone that comes from a business process management or business enterprise programming background that feedback needs to be almost immediate in order for it to have effect when you're talking gamification.
How would you deal with the issue, though, of aligning that fun with a particular business goal? Because if it's just fun, it's probably not going to make it in the business world. That needs to be aligned with some particular metric. And there needs to be somebody who discovers that particular goal and is the kind of the keeper of that goal. How do you deal with that issue?
I think there has to be someone at the product management level that is thinking holistically about what's going on and is balancing extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards. So you can stimulate adoption with extrinsic rewards. Do this, you're going to get this bonus. Do this, you're going to get these points that are available for redemption. You can't just say this is going to be better because this is going to make your life experience better. Well, half of your employees or more, depending on how poisoned your environment are going to roll their eyes and say, well, this is some hippy-dippy bull crap that management is trying to impose on us. And if you have well-compensated employees and just dangling a carrot, you'll be able to spend 500 points out of our catalog. Whoopee, I can get a paperweight, or something. That's not going to work either. So you need to balance the fun aspects and the extrinsic motivation that you provide, make it significant enough so that the other effects can actually have a chance to take hold once engagement picks up.
Any other comments? Business strategy versus game design.
Yeah, so we found a little bit of interesting observations, kind of different than what you just said, Obie. So what we found is that business strategy and really understanding the game of work, if you will, was slightly more important or was first on the list before understanding how to build a game. And the reason that we found that is because we saw a lot of enterprise software with gamification where people just kind of injected a game into the workflow of, say, approving an invoice, and it just didn't belong there. So people didn't understand kind of like how does the game fit into the work because they didn't understand the game of work itself. So we put kind of understanding work and the game of work ahead of understanding the game itself. Example, performance reviews, right? So you can go in and say, whoa, the real challenge with that is that a manager once a year has to spend a lot of time completing a form. That is not the challenge. The actual challenge is that they have no idea what to put in that form. They don't have the information. They don't remember what happened 10 months ago. And even if they do, they copy and paste that information between one form to another form to another form. So if you actually compared your performance review forms, I know you're not supposed to, but show them to your colleagues and you will see that the information is kind of the same, a little bit reworded, right? Because that's all they do is they copy and paste a lot, right? So understanding the notion of work and the game of work is a little bit more important for us than actually knowing the game to play, because then we can just instill the game in the right point of the workflow and the process itself.
I mean, just to follow up on that, very similar kind of experience, right? My initial reaction when we looked at these questions was, game design is really hard, and to understand what game designers do is something which we pay a lot of attention to, and when we design these enterprise systems. But when it actually comes push to shove, because it actually came down to a question of who do we actually hire? We hire people who understand business strategy over game designers. Because I can actually train somebody around motivational design and gamification techniques. Very hard to get somebody who understands business strategy in different business environments. And so even though game design and game mechanics and understanding how to create fun is really important, we realized it was actually much easier to train that than it is to actually hire somebody who understands business strategy and the intricacies of work.
I think there's a fundamental split between the approaches that we can take in this vein. So one is building fundamentally a business tool. So for instance, Rypple is a business tool for creating, say, what would typically be created by review processes and so on and so forth.
It's a social tool meant to address a pain point that was always viewed as a business.
But it's primarily a business tool that has some gamification aspects added to it. And then there's also like an interesting area of research, I think, which is creating games that are first and foremost games that have second order effects that are beneficial to the business. Mm-hmm. So they're not business tools in and of themselves. So, maybe the answer is it depends which direction you're taking.
Charlie?
The thing I would say is
I'm
I'm
going to
not
pick
sure.
up on that in the next question. But
Okay.
Charlie,
I was going to say, I'm not sure business strategy and game design need to be separate and independent of each other. I think I always look at it as first you have to identify the problem you're trying to solve. And obviously the greater the problem is, you're willing to experiment and test more, versus if it's a small problem, you want to give someone less money, less time to try to figure out what that is. And I think end of the day, when I look at gamification, it's about motivating people. How do you motivate individuals? And great leaders find amazingly creative ways to motivate their staff and armies of people. And it's trying to figure out a way to put that into a framework, and then you can call it a game, you can call it leadership. I'm not sure what you call it, but end of the day, it's still about motivating people to go solve some problem you have, which is file your expense reports on time, be healthier, recognize people. It's whatever that problem is. I think you got to identify the problem, and then you just go down the path of trying to solve it. And I'm not sure.
That's good. I was going to ask you about motivation. A lot of the panelists here picked up on the issue of motivation. So let me throw this out more generally. Obie, I think you mentioned the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. One of the things that a lot of us hear is that games are about extrinsic motivation, giving bananas to chimps and things that are not really at the core of intrinsic, internally self-discovered things that people actually want to do. So let's have a few comments on that. That's something that we've got to work through. Motivation is critical to this. That's what we're all trying to do. But especially this distinction of intrinsic, extrinsic, and especially that extrinsic, thanks to Daniel Pink and others, is really not looked at well in organizational behavior right now. What comments on? Kes, I know you've thought a lot about this.
So this is one area which I've spent a lot of time. I mean, it's actually part of my research is understanding human motivations, understanding the motivational system of the brain. Whereas this dichotomy between intrinsic and extrinsic is kind of a false dichotomy in some respects. So intrinsic motivation is the things which are innately which we're drawn towards, and we've got a huge range of them. But extrinsic motivation, which we've worked through our research, is actually understanding that it's trying to augment an existing intrinsic motivation. Like the old Skinner and the rat, right? If the rat pressed the lever and got a badge, that wouldn't motivate it. It has to be a food pellet or something which is motivating to the rat itself. So if you think about humans, where our motivations, where badges, expertise, that kind of social collaboration is important, it's still the innate intrinsic motivation has to be behind it. So the way we look at extrinsic motivations, the way we tie rewards, reward schedules, all these game mechanics has to be tied to an intrinsic. Yes, we can create very artificial environments like Las Vegas or things in software which can create very artificial motivations, but in the end, they normally crumble because they're not based on something which has meaning or purpose to the human.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of research on that as well. And so, for example, our recognition and badging workflow, whenever an employee receives a badge and a thank you and a recognition for the great work that they've done, they also receive what's called social competencies and skills that others believe they're good at. And if you think about it, there's a lot of intrinsic motivation there because somebody's thanking me for doing great work and they're documenting this in real time, and it's encouraging me to then go in and do even better work on the next project. There's also this notion where this intrinsic motivation becomes extrinsic when somebody else needs an expert. They will search for skills like the ones I was given and will find that the community validated that I have a set of skills that are valuable for this project. I may get a promotion as a result of that. My salary may increase. So there's this kind of ladder of motivations, if you will, and one leads into another. That's how we built the workflow at Rypple.
Let me ask a question here. I'll start with you, Mara, since you come from an interesting corporate context related to this question. So a lot of us here, when we start doing this, we need to make standalone applications that may open up in a separate window, that we may visit once a day, once a week, but are not part of the place or the venue on our screen where we actually do most of our work. So if you think about building a mechanic that is kind of an add-on to the day with good value versus really thinking about games and game psychology as a core business process, as a way to redesign work, not necessarily to add something to the old design, but to fundamentally redesign work, and then as a technology comment, to actually build it into the place where people do their work, like an SAP screen or something like that. So comment about gamification as single elements that are added to work versus something that's more fundamental about work design.
Well, I think
in 20 seconds.
In 20 seconds.
That's the game.
Using
Take as long
Gamification.
as you
First, I think it is not that simple to just talk about taking a game mechanic. In my gamification community that I run internal at SAP, I've encountered at least 6 or 7 clusters of where people are coming and trying to gamify stuff. This is internal processes and business applications is just one of them. Another one is communities that they run internally or externally to engage people more. Another one is marketing branding. It's a complete different set of things where they are doing that. Then onboarding new hires, new employees, training employees is another area that we have. Then, of course, using games or conference games or workshop games in order to build teams or to understand certain problems better. And then the last one might be something like overcoming cultural biases or status biases, because if I have a manager in the team, then his opinion apparently normally counts more, and I could get a wrong result in prioritizing requirements. So I need games on top of that. They're all very different in how I do that. So it's not so easy to talk about that. And I have no clear answer to that. Each one requires a different one. In addition, what's happening here, if I'm talking now focusing on software, because we are a business software company, and that's where I'm coming from as an original developer background, is you're starting to introduce mechanics that track user achievements. So you create suddenly a huge aggregator inside your company when you succeed with connecting all systems to this one tracking platform, a gamification platform or reputation platform or however you call that. And by exposing users, we come to this situation where we suddenly find out, oh, these are the experts. We didn't know about that. And I should promote them and not the guy who is kissing up to me all the time. Or this is the person that I should not fire, and I had them on the plan to do so. So this could become a huge disruptor, in my opinion, that you're gonna see, a huge aggregator, maybe even creating more data than every other software system in the corporation. And that brings a lot of other questions. What
Yeah.
I have a quick
Obie, yeah.
I have a quick anecdote about that. So basically, with our case study system, the CEO told me a very interesting story about it. He said when we started out rolling the system out, there was this one particular developer in our group, this at an 80-person company, who was on the verge of getting fired because he couldn't deliver anything on time, and they had counseled him repeatedly about it over the course of a year. So he was about to be put on a performance plan or anything like that. They roll out the system. It turns out he gets the most appreciation out of everyone, which gives the CEO a lot of pause, and he stops to actually look at the situation, talk to his managers, and he figures out that this poor individual is just helping everyone else in the company in his group succeed, so he's getting a lot of thanks from everyone to the detriment of his own performance. And he says, if I had fired him, that would have been the worst mistake I've made in the life of the company. I said, you need to make that guy a manager.
Yeah,
So that he doesn't have his own.
Other comments about this, adding a window onto current work versus using this whole psychology and the sensibilities that we're representing here to redesign work. I mean, so why not have, if you are selling routers at Cisco, why not go to work and log in with your guild to a World of Warcraft where everything is there and the entire work is done in that place versus, I know one reason why not, because it would cost $10 million to make the piece of software and we need to ramp up to that. But this full Monte versus piecemeal kind of hitting at gamification.
I was going to say, just kind of going back to our example in the sort of fitness portal that we built, we found the actual reward matters. So to the point of like you can't give rats badges and expect them to actually want to keep doing whatever you ask them to do. So the reward has to be relevant to the audience.
Rats?
Well, I think was it the rat?
Oh, okay.
So he can't give rats badges.
Right. So like giving rats badges is not going to motivate them to do anything. So the reward matters because it has to be relevant to the audience that you're targeting, and then it has to be competitive. And it's something that we learned in our iterations of our sort of fitness portal game. So we gave the winning team $1,000 in points every week if you worked out the most. And that got it to go from 0 to 15%. Then we created this leaderboard, because without a scoreboard, you can't really compete. So we created a leaderboard so everyone can see who's working out and who's not, and the score of the team. And it worked, and that's what shot it up at first, and went up to 50, 60%, but then it quickly started dropping, because one of the teams was just a powerhouse of fitness gurus that worked out more than everybody else, and everyone else said, we're never going to win. So everyone stopped competing as much because they said, I can't win this game. So one of the engineers over a weekend looked and said, we have all the data of who checked into the gym and how many times they worked out. So they introduced this algorithm, they call it Fit Rank. And they just gave a star ranking to every employee of what their fit rank was from 1 to 5 stars. And then we did a reorg of the team so that your average fit rank had to be equal across all 5 teams. And once it got competitive again, it sustained at 80%. Yeah. So I think the reward matters, but the competition really matters too.
Yeah, with games, in order to win, you have to lose. So you have to lose before you win. And I think the healthy competition creates this notion of learning where you learn how to accomplish a task better in the business process, in this case, by playing this game where you sometimes lose and only then you win. And I think that's important.
So to answer your question very quickly, so we run into this problem a lot. So we work with these large companies who want to roll out these systems, and they ask us a very similar question. Should we try and create this interface, which is the overall portal for the career of this employee? And our general answer is yeah. If you can do it and you want to invest in it, that's the right way to do it. You want to create this engagement across their whole work day, as it were. So we're working with dealerships, working with salespeople. That seems to work really well. We always use the analogy of Katie Salen's working with the MacArthur Foundation to create a school which is designed around gamification principles. It's very different than creating a little game here and there for teaching different elements of education. These children actually log in and work out what their quest is, their knowledge quest for the day, and they actually go on these learning quests, which is kind of the thing which a lot of companies come to us wanting to try and do. So the reality is that's where we would recommend it, but in reality most people start off with small little sections where they can actually get the most ROI very quickly or utilization.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question that everyone resonated to when we were exchanging mail. Danger. There may be danger involved in doing games at work. There are HR risks. There are tax liabilities. There are labor laws. There are repetitive stress injuries that will come making something that's way too attractive. Who knows what all the dangers are? What are, in your experiences in talking to your own clients and thinking about games, what are the watch-outs for doing games at work? Mario, I think everybody will have a comment on this. Mario, go ahead.
I wanted to go ahead because my company is actually coming from Germany, so we have a huge workforce, like 15 or 20,000 people. It's a third of the workforce is in Germany, with strict labor laws and with very critical people about gamification. And we could not, for example, easily start with gamification there. It is a huge problem because when I'm creating this data, tracking this data, immediately the Workers' Council would come and ask for what this data is used. As soon as a manager can use that for performance reviews and these kind of things, it has to be fitting to the privacy laws and also to the labor laws there. The danger is not so much on the side of the people who are performing, but of the people who are not performing or not being tracked properly. Right. The second danger that I see is who owns this data? Do I as an employee own the data that is tracked about my achievements, or is it the corporation? What is, if I'm changing companies, switching to another company, can I take this data with me? It's a huge aggregator. It is my reputation that is in there, and we face that problem on our external community where we have contributors, people who are posting and earning points, because we had also leaderboards of companies. And once employees who contributed a lot went to another company, the companies were complaining that they lost their rank and lost the points, and they should own that because they paid the time.
Yeah, good. Other watch-outs. Obie.
Completely different angle on this. If you don't do these games properly, you can marginalize or create or reinforce biases that are already present in the politics or the culture of the company. And it would be a shame because actually some of these games are actually a force for good, whether it's fitness or getting people to appreciate each other or better feedback cycles to each other. These are all great things. But if you don't design the game mechanic in a way that's inclusive and covers the different types of motivations that people have for getting involved in these systems, you can end up marginalizing further the groups that are maybe not so interested in the aspects of the game mechanic that you put in, or just further marginalizing groups that are already at a disadvantage because they don't self-promote, because they don't, maybe they're less technically competent, and you end up, shoving them further to the margins.
Yeah. I mean, to follow up on your fitness example before, in a fitness example, I think you can spot some of these bad competition which kind of is created by your system, and you can fix it. But in some of the working situations which we work in, if we created environments where that competition actually started creating negative behaviors, it's not as easy to fix it once you've actually taken a group and they've got to that point where, like you say, marginalized, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to really finally balance and tune these games so we actually encourage, very cooperative. This balance between cooperative and competition is very important, especially when we look at sales groups. And even though initially sales, you would think it's just totally competitive. But you want to basically differentiate between sort of like political campaigns, which are negative and negative attack ads, and healthy competition, which is very much about the principles. So
sometimes you have to be careful about the game becoming a bad game that kind of, surfaces bad behaviors. For example, let's talk about recognition for a minute. What we want with recognition is when you observe something awesome, you go and you tell others and you make it public and you make it transparent and you make it real time so that everybody can engage. What we don't want with recognition is when you see something awesome, you don't do that because you don't want to give someone a badge so that they have more than you do. So it's, you have to be very careful not to encourage the kind of behavior that doesn't promote what your game is meant to actually do for the enterprise, right? So you have to really, really watch, what happens with your workforce and how they react to it. Not everyone reacts in the same way. There are some conversations here about gender differences about women and men, right? So even in that regard, you need to make sure that you build the kind of game that women and men are very comfortable playing, basically.
You want a slightly different one?
Other dangers. Be thinking, by the way, of what questions you would like to pose to the panel or individuals, but other dangers.
I was going to say, I think first, in general, like the notion of motivating people to something that's competitive and fun is a thing that can be used in almost anything, but there's an element of common sense where don't start trying to gamify like sexual harassment at work. I mean, don't pick the topics. I mean, I would not, I mean, when you interview candidates, there are 3 things you generally can't do. You can't ask age, you can't ask religion, you can't ask, I mean, there's discrimination only in certain categories. Just don't pick that to start, especially if you've never built a game or tried this. Now, I'll give you an example. I have an employee in our company by the name of Gautam who created this game for drinking water. And the reason was he found out from a nutritionist that, we have drinks and sodas and juices in the office. Sugar is bad for you. So she said drinking water is actually better than anything else, but you have to drink a lot of cups of water a day. So he just created a whiteboard, and just wrote, whoever volunteered wrote their names, how many cups of water you drank that day. And it was a very simple game, and they just started drinking more water, and they stopped drinking more juices and sodas. But then afterwards, there were people who were drinking way too much water. So they have to figure out, yes, it can have sort of negative behaviors, but when I think about games at work, I mean, I think about sales teams. I mean, what sales team hasn't had a competition change on them because it didn't work? Whether it was bad behaviors and motivation, when, sales teams are always changing their competitions in their games. I think it's okay to change. And that's why I go back to you have to be able to fail and you have to iterate. But just use common sense and don't pick the worst topics first.
Yeah,
one last danger.
There's just crazy unintended consequences that can arise, especially in large corporations. Like, I know of a very, very large financial company that implemented a recognition and rewards program where they had a points currency that could flow between employees all over the company. Well, what happened was when it came time to take money out of the budgets to pay for those points that were flying around, all of a sudden you had a whole bunch of interdepartmental battles going on over whose budget it was going to come out of. And it sunk the program, so, just...
So there are some watch-outs. So we have about 10 minutes left here, but I'd love to have questions from the audience. I see a couple hands here. I'm not sure if there's a microphone person around, but if I can hear it, I'll repeat it right here in the front.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on encouraging gamification in corporate cultures where maybe people aren't encouraged to stand out or for the individual to rise because we have things like leaderboards and competition. I'm just wondering how you can get those kinds of settings.
So I don't know if everybody can hear, but gamification in corporate cultures where there may be groups or individuals that have a hard time standing out.
So one of the things which we do is not every environment should be competitive. Like you shouldn't, like even in game design, right? Not every game should have leaderboards, and it can create, people being very disengaged. So encouraging cooperation and empathy and sharing and recognition. There's other ways of designing systems around that to fit in with corporate cultures like that. To the point, I'd say most corporate cultures should be a little bit more cooperative as opposed to competitive in most of the areas.
I would say design your game in that case so that the visibility of those leaderboards is local enough that it does not pose a threat to that particular aspect of the culture.
The only other comment I was going to make was that when you look at just the workplace and people, every CEO I've ever talked to, and you ask them, what's the number one criteria you interview for? And they say drive. They want people who are just very driven. So if people have drive, they like to compete. And so it's just a matter of figuring out what kind of competition would drive that and motivate that group.
Mm-hmm. So, just to follow up on that, one of the things we used to do in software development as we hired was a very interesting question. We used to ask somebody sort of in their sense, do you want to be the best programmer in the company? Is that something which motivates you? And we had a lot of follow-on questions because we were really trying to weed out people who would, because in programming is a very cooperative and collaborative endeavor in most cases. And we found that people who were super competitive actually weren't great team programmers. And we actually designed teams around more people who were cooperative as opposed to people who were interested in just being them, being the best.
One personality headline, responding to Charlie here, is that there are a lot of highly driven introverts that do well in games.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is that one of the ways to answer what you asked is that just put it out there and see what happens, right? You think that the culture is such that it's not encouraging people to stand out, but gamification, if it's done right for the right process, is not about standing out. It's about collaborating and becoming better at what you do. So just put it out there and see what happens. Do it with a team. Do it with 2 teams. Do it company-wide.
Over here and then in the front over on the left side. Yes.
This is a question for Kes. You mentioned that you worked over here, with nurses I just wanted to ask if you could just give a little bit of explanation of how that sort of dynamic worked from the perspective of the nurses as well as for the patients. And I guess the second question would be is whether or not this sort of mechanic could be applied to a place where there was, let's say, no hospitals like the Amazon, and how you would sort of activate that with the nurses virtually.
So in healthcare especially as we design systems in the healthcare environment, the initial way we approach it is looking at motivations. So we were talking to somebody and they were talking about a medical device, and to encourage better use of the device, they were thinking, there's actually somebody in this audience who talked to me today about that, was to try and encourage nurses to be more responsive. What we found as we started working with nurses and doctors was realizing that most of these people's intrinsic motivations need to be tapped first before we start looking at them not doing their job properly. Everything which we found in the enterprise fits into this mold, and they're realizing when people aren't doing the things which you think they should be doing, nobody comes to work. Well, not many people come to work not wanting to do a good job, and we need to tap into that. And in the healthcare world, where there's a lot of stress, a lot of things going on, we had to really start understanding the world the nurse is living in. So it wasn't just solving the problem of why they weren't getting responsiveness on this one device. It was understanding that they were getting bombarded with different requests from different people and devising a system which could help them actually manage that. That was actually what we had to solve as opposed to fixing this one device. So, as opposed to your question about the Amazon and designing this thing, again goes back to intrinsic motivations. We have to design systems which are for people who want to do good, who are out there, if it's in a hospital or in charity work or volunteer work out there, we're really trying to design systems which tap into those intrinsic motivations.
Yeah, thank you. This question is for Mario. When I think of enterprise software, SAP comes to mind immediately. I think it's really interesting that you guys gamified your sales process and you did this whole gamification app contest and so forth. How far do you see SAP taking gamification? Do you see that being used internally? Do you see that being deployed to your customers?
So we have a couple of things that are rolled out. We have one that is productive, the SAP Community Network. We have internal mobile apps that around carpooling sustainability that are using game mechanics a lot. We when I'm coming back next week, I'm having talk with multiple people from different departments, sales on demand, career on demand. Especially on demand is an interesting area where they want to include now game mechanics for release of next year. The problem that we have is that these events that we had an internal gamification event as well 2 months prior to this week, where we figured out, okay, we are missing such a tracking system. That means a gamification platform or something like that. And we need to come up with how to do that, how to integrate something like that. So that's the stage where we are at. Yes?
Other questions? Okay. Yes, please.
Software development, essentially.
I can take that.
So if everybody didn't hear that, how do you get companies to begin this process and begin paying for something they're not used to paying for with respect to designing internal
software
processes?
as a service?
Yeah.
I can answer that.
If you can.
Yeah. We have several answers to that up here.
Yeah, as an individual that I met.
Business cards to hand you.
As an individual I met actually at a gamification conference, I met actually Gabe at, named of Michael Schrage, and he was telling me that what people called R&D, and R&D is moving to what he called ENS, experiment and scale. Start small. Start small and then scale. And I think that when you experiment small, it doesn't cost as much. And in fact, it may cost almost nothing but just soft cost of time and effort in some small scale. And then you have to think that the goal is to scale it, though. So move R&D to experiment and scale, so ENS.
Okay, how do we begin?
Don't buy the software that requires you to buy the business productivity tool and then buy the game. So don't pay for the game. Pay for the business process that has the game built into it. Performance reviews. Don't buy old school performance reviews forms that don't help people accomplish things, right? So buy the kind of tool that helps you solicit feedback, plays the game with employees of soliciting that feedback on a daily basis. Then you don't feel like you're paying for two separate things, right? And I heard someone else say SaaS. Yes, software as a service is another answer. Buy the delivery model that doesn't require from you a lot of commitment, basically, because you're not sure yet what you're doing.
Other answers?
I would simply say, if you can save $1 million per month with a gamified application, then you're going for it. Or if you have higher data quality out of that, then you're going for that. Or more timeliness in getting the data entered in the system, then you're going for it. And that is what we are looking at the moment. This carpooling application, for example, is a special case because it's running internally at the moment. We have in Germany a lot of corporate cars. The gas is paid by SAP. So if suddenly people are carpooling, we have multiple effects that's happening. Less gas consumption, that means SAP saves money on that. We have a huge networking effect because suddenly people are riding with each other that would normally never meet each other. I'm stopping.
No, finish. I didn't mean to whisper so you could hear me.
Or I need less parking structures at my location to plan for that. So, and I'm saving money with that. And that comes all together. If I can save this money, then I'm going for that.
I turn this over to you.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for this really fascinating panel. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Byron.